There's a Tackle Your Feelings campaign which is being run at the moment. It's the Irish Rugby Union Players Association are talking about it, and very interestingly, the media that was being done to promote the campaign, John Cooney, the Ulster scrum half, ex-Ireland scrum half, it's fair to say at this point. Certainly he thinks he's ex-Ireland, and he's talking about playing with Johnny Sexton. And this is the headline in the back of the Indo this morning. I found it quite difficult to play beside Sexton when I started, says Cooney. Cooney played with Sexton during a spell at Leinster before also linking up with the veteran at Ireland. Sexton is known as a tough taskmaster when it comes to driving standards. This is Will Slattery's story. When I first started playing with Leinster, I did find it quite difficult the way he kind of spoke to me. We did play a bit with Ireland. I won't really expand on that too much. It's not really the type of communication I enjoy as a rugby player. I prefer a positive attitude. No one wants to make mistakes. It's something I've learned in how I communicate with other players. He's not the only out-half that I've played with that acts like that. I'm sure through maturity, most players, as they get older, realise that they can communicate with players. There's different ways to get the best out of people, and it's probably something I've learned through the last couple of years as a rugby player. It's interesting that it's the official Players Union Tackle Your Feelings campaign, where Cooney is talking about playing with Sexton and clearly did not enjoy it. So, you know, he is publicly talking about his feelings about the time that he played with Ireland's best player over the last decade. Certainly since the retirement of Paul O'Connell, it's fair to say that Sexton is Ireland's best and certainly most important player over that period of time, and World Player of the Year. But, you know, it turns out a challenging teammate, according to somebody who had to play with him both at club and country level.
Like, I don't think it's overly surprising that he would have been a challenging teammate. It's interesting that he's come out and said it, really, isn't it? It's obviously quite bad, and it's obviously something that has stuck in Cooney's mind. Like, from the outside looking in, it might have been a situation, I thought, where in the middle of a game, Johnny Sexton would obviously be a pretty tough taskmaster. I think everybody watching a game at home can tell that, on himself, on his teammates, on the opposition, on the referee, for everyone. But what you kind of assume is that any bad feeling that's on the pitch gets sorted out afterwards, that nobody is that bothered about it. A couple of weeks down the line, maybe Sexton says, listen, you know, heat of the moment or whatever it is. It's just interesting now that down the line, Cooney is saying that no, that was still not an easy thing to go through, and there is a different way to speak to certain teammates. I'm sure Conor Murray's brain works in a different way to John Cooney's brain, and maybe one is more of a carrot guy, one is more of a stick guy, and that is the way it works with a whole multitude of different players. But obviously, as a player, sometimes you only have one method of actually delivering your message, and from Sexton's perspective, I think we all kind of know it's done in a pretty harsh way, and that was one of the criticisms I guess people had when he was named as captain last year, was how that harshness then translated itself to his conversations with the referee. Yeah,
I mean, how long ago was it that, was it Bernard Lebeat who had referred to Sexton as the Zlatan of rugby? And that was the harassing teammates. That was the stuff that was the criticism of Sexton's style. Like, is part of this just that's who Sexton is and everybody has to adapt to it because he's such a good player, and so therefore, you know, if he's driving those standards, then those standards have to be met?
I would say,
and that's tough. Or is there something in what Cooney says where different players are going to respond to different things, and so from an emotional intelligence perspective, you can't be the same person to everybody, that you get more with honey than vinegar?
Like, I think that when you're the World Player of the Year and you're clearly the best player on that team, I think there's no question that he's been the best player of the last decade. I think you can not do what you want, but I think that sort of carry on is accepted. And in fact, it's probably pointed out by some people maybe as a reason why said player is World Player of the Year. The challenge is, how does Sexton alter that when he does become captain, now that he is captain? Has his attitude towards his teammates changed a little bit since becoming captain? Because there is an arm around the shoulder role that you kind of have to take up as captain. If you're turning around to your teammates after a bad loss, for example, especially some of your new teammates, some of the debutants, and I don't know, like tearing strips out of them. I'm not, like, Cooney's not saying that's happening, but it might be in keeping. Like, that really can't happen as a captain. You do have to kind of change your tone. You also probably need to change your tone a little bit the older you get, and when you start getting over the very peak of your career. Now, a lot of players that we've seen down through the years tend to mellow in their older age, and maybe that happens with Sexton over the next little while. But the World Player of the Year can get away with that sort of stuff, where a former teammate is coming out a while after and saying it was tough to play with him. I'm not sure you can keep that up for the entire career.
So it was Labit was the coach, right? He was the Racing coach. He just wanted to get these quotes properly from the time. This is from 2016. Is that around the time? 2015, October 2015. These are. He didn't always perform for Racing. He knew it very well. Labit told Media Olympic it irritated him greatly. When things didn't work as he'd hoped, he was hypersensitive. Several times I had to remind him that there are certain ways of saying things. Jonathan had the tendency to employ a strong manner and a very colourful language in the heat of the action. Sometimes it was on the verge of insult. At times, Jonathan was really uncontrollable. When we ran plays, if someone forgot his role, he was capable of giving them a bollocking. No matter what had happened before, he gave them a roasting. Sometimes I tore out my hair. Johnny is someone who's perpetually putting everything in question and who obliges you to be constantly on alert. Like, I can see if you're a young player coming in trying to make your way, how that's quite intimidating. But you can also see that this is what is going to get you to a level where you believe you can compete in a World Cup. And I just wonder if it tips too much occasionally, is that just the price you pay in professional sport? Or are we supposed to have a more nuanced, modern approach to the workplace?
I think if it tips too much at its peak, I think that's totally acceptable. I think that is absolutely the price you pay. And in fairness, like you could ask the question now: what do Sexton's current teammates, what do his current coaches think of him in this regard to what John Cooney is saying? And Andy Farrell's given him the captaincy in the last little while. If this was such a big problem, where this was the reputation that he'd been labelled with, and it was seen as a negative thing throughout Irish rugby, does he get the captaincy? It would seem like a pretty strange thing to do, unless Andy Farrell thought that this wasn't too much of a problem. So it is coming from the perspective of one person here. I'm sure other people have felt it as well. But there will be, I'm sure, other people and other coaches like Andy Farrell who see that as a massive positive, who see it as drive. And I don't know, maybe when players get to a certain level in their career, they don't have that drive. But nobody's getting away with half efforts here and there when Johnny Sexton's in the camp.
No, it's true. It's just that obviously now he's much older than the young players coming through. So like, if Craig Casey, for example, was somebody who felt like he couldn't be spoken to like that, would that be an issue in the Ireland camp now? Do you know, like, there's, as you were saying, when you're playing at the World Player of the Year level, that's fine. But I'm sure Sexton has changed in the last 5 years. Everybody changes and grows and matures and takes a different attitude to things. Is it possible that, so if that characteristic is still there, and if the role that Sexton is going to be playing over the next 18 months is as a closer, finisher, sub, second string out half, because, you know, you'd have to say that as soon as Joey Carbery puts 10, 12 games together, he's going to be more than likely Ireland's starter. Can Sexton change enough so that he can be the encouraging person and add that to his late era?
I think absolutely. I think Ronan O'Gara has spoken about how he had to change his mindset completely, going from a player to a coach. And I know that this is not the same thing. He's still a player. There is an alteration that someone as competitive as O'Gara had to make, and he managed to achieve, that I do think that a player can undergo over a period of time. There's also a sense of reality that would have to kick in if Sexton does get to a stage where he is substitute 10. It's not going to happen soon. I think, as we discussed last week, he's still very much Ireland's number 110. And if you're the number 110, I think you have a right to be able to be a little bit grumpy, quite grumpy with your teammates when you want, when you're that sort of player. Does that change when he becomes a bench player, if he becomes a bench player? I think so. I think that he doesn't live in a fanciful world where he doesn't actually appreciate the reality of the situation, because it would be a little bit ridiculous if you're on the periphery of the starting team and still giving it the big one. I think that there would still be a huge demand from him coming off the bench. There would still be a huge demand from him in training, and that's what you want. But maybe that OTT level of crushing teammates at times might just dissipate a little bit. So yeah, absolutely, people can change, and as I said, I think there's been many cases where a player gets into the twilight of their career and they just mellow a little bit. They start to realise that this rugby career isn't going to last forever, or the sporting career isn't going to last forever, and there's a little bit more perspective about things.